and gave meaningful names to children that reflected ancestors. What I call for, and I've called for this for now 40 years, and I've been credited with expounding the idea of Afrocentric knowledge, that is, knowledge that derives from narratives that center Africans as subjects of questions and principles in history and agents in all political, environmental, economic, cultural, and social actions, so that we can understand who we are and what gifts we bring to ourselves and to the world. And so what I've called for is that we not be marginalized, don't marginalize ourselves, but that we see ourselves as at the very beginning of human history. And our children do not so much have to go get knowledge, since they are born into a world of knowledge, often dismissed, often hidden, often erased, often eliminated by Eurocentrists, who may be white or Black. One does not have to be white to be a believer in the doctrine of white supremacy. There are thousands of Africans and Asians who are participating in the world of pan-European construction without realizing that they are burying their own ancestors. I personally, as you know, some of you, I have been influenced by many people. Herbert Vilakazi, Archie Mafeji, J.A. Shofala, Steve Biko, Thabo Mbeki, Mangalizo Subukwe, Simpiwe Sisanti, Lahosa Malloy. I've read deeply in the works of other Africans like Chinwezu, Ayakwe Arma, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Maulana Karenga, Ivan Van Sertima, C.T. Kato, Amma Mazama, Danny Nabaderi, Winston Van Horn, and Marima Ani. I've even learned from those with whom I've debated, such as Cornel West, Henry Louis Gates, Kwame Jeche, Ifeanyi Menkiti, and Ali Mazrui. However, I was personally inspired by Sheikh Anta Diop, whom I traveled to meet in Dakar in 1980, and enthusiastically told him that I wanted to follow his path as an intellectual and defend Africa, whereupon he said to me, "Young man, Africa needs no defense. You must advance, always advance." At that point, there was nothing more for me to do than to interrogate every instance of African life, particularly as that life was encountered European life and understanding. And if the subject was time, I wanted to know how and why we created the first calendar along the Nile. If the subject was human anatomy, I wanted to discover how Africans mastered mummification and the biology of human beings. If the subject was literature, I wanted to go and see for myself the writing on the walls of the pyramids, where Africans had written some of the earliest pyramid texts. I wanted to see that for myself. I wanted to see the papyrus for myself. I wanted to learn the language myself. I studied the language. I wanted to teach the language because I wanted to go back way before Greek was ever spoken. Thousands of years before Greek was spoken, we can see that African languages were at the very beginning, very heart of human civilization. So I want to just bring this. I'm gonna say a few more words and then bring this to it. And Carter Woodson wrote a book called "The Miseducation of the Negro." Boy, it's getting to be a long time ago, almost 100 years ago. Not quite 100 years, not really, but at least 90. He wrote "The Miseducation of the Negro," and he said, if you went to school, you would never learn anything except the inferiority of Black people. And this is one of the things that we as students in the 1960s, certainly at the University of California, we knew this at UCLA, that if you went to school, and many of us older scholars went to universities in the 60s, partly as a response to the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and the death of Malcolm X. Universities opened their doors to us, and we went in. But the one thing we saw very early on was you learn nothing except the inferiority of Black people. This is all they teach. What we saw was white studies everywhere. This was the real shocker to us, particularly in the South of the United States, where we had been in schools where people knew a little bit, but they knew enough to know that Africa was a home of civilization. Mr. Tharp, my 11th grade history teacher, knew that. He knew enough to understand that the Peras of ancient Kemet were Black people. He understood enough about Africa to know about Great Zimbabwe. So they knew about Mansa Musa. They had this knowledge, and they could teach us some things and give us inspiration. And this knowledge came to them sometimes piecemeal, but it came to them. But when we got to the universities, dominated by European thinkers and European teachers, there were no Black people in psychology. In the textbooks, there were Black students, but there were no Black people in the textbooks. There were no Black theorists. There were no Black scholars or philosophers in political science that they exposed us to. We were not exposed in sociology to great Black thinkers about transformation of societies. We were in classes and subjects and fields in education. And in those days, we didn't learn about the men and women who basically taught the world from Wasset. We didn't know about that. They didn't open that door. When I took Greek classes with Prentice Meadow at UCLA, and he talked about the Greek miracle, he didn't know anything about Africa, and he admitted it. When I questioned A.J. Ayres, the outstanding British philosopher, about African philosophy, he admitted publicly, "Young man, I know nothing of African philosophy." This is what African-American students immediately found and discovered. And that's why Black studies became the cry of the students, because we remembered what Carter Woodson said. He said, "You would never thereby learn that Africans first domesticated the sheep, the goat, and the cow. That Africans developed the idea of trial by jury. That Africans produced the first stringed elements, or rather instruments, and gave the world its greatest boon in the discovery of iron. You would never learn that if you went to school in America or in colonial Africa, you see." Sheikh Anta Diop of Senegal, our greatest intellectual of the 20th century, wrote, "The future of Blacks all over the world is interconnected. Black people must find a way to articulate this historic unity." Wade Nobles, the preeminent African psychologist in America, wrote in Kemet and the African Worldview that the political control of knowledge is the necessary condition for white supremacy. The political control of knowledge is the necessary condition for white supremacy. Maulana Karenga, founder of Kwanzaa, wrote in Introduction to Black Studies that the task of the Black scholar must be to rescue and reconstruct Black history as well as humanity.